Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 4th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Then Jesus, filled with the power of the Spirit, returned to Galilee, and a report about him spread through all the surrounding country. He began to teach in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. When he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of the sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
You may be seated. These past couple of weeks, I've been watching some of the tennis matches of the Australian Open. And there's an interesting occurrence and commentary that sometimes happens, especially in the men's matches. You see, the men's matches are who wins the best out of 5 sets. And sometimes, after the first 2 sets have been played, each man has won 1 set. And a commentator will say something like, "Now it's down to the best 2 out of 3. It's almost as if those first 2 sets hadn't taken place. Everything is all even again. Granted, each man is probably more tired than if he played those first 2 sets, but there's still this sense of starting over. Whatever errors each man may have made in those first 2 sets, they don't matter now. All that matters is winning 2 of the next 3. It's starting all over. In our Old Testament lesson this morning, there is that same sense of starting over. The people in our story have returned to their homeland after decades of exile in Babylon. They are in the process of rebuilding the temple, which had been destroyed when they were led away to exile. The walls around the city have just finished being rebuilt, and so there's finally a sense of security in Jerusalem. It is in many ways a chance to start over, to rebuild their city, to rebuild their temple, and to rebuild their lives back in their native land. And so they gather to hear the word of the Lord, the book of the law of Moses, the Pentateuch, what we would consider the first 5 books of our Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. These books contain some of the best known stories and people of the Old Testament: the creation story, the story of Noah and the flood, the stories of Abraham and Sarah, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers, the story of Moses and the flight from Egypt to the Promised Land. That's the land that they have now come back to again after the long exile. It is almost like a mini version of the Exodus story, this return to their land. And just as Moses read the law to the Israelites just before they took possession of the Promised Land in the first place, Ezra the priest now reads from the books of Moses to these people who have returned to their land. This is a new start for these people, and everyone is included in this opportunity to hear the word of the Lord: men, women, even young people, at least those who could hear with understanding. They are meeting in a public space, in the square before the water gate, rather than in the temple space where only men would have been allowed. And so Ezra reads from early morning until midday. It doesn't even sound like there was a break for lunch. However, even given that length of time, Ezra probably still could not have read the entirety of the books of Moses. We don't know which parts he read, but whatever they were, they made a significant impact on the people hearing it. They paid attention, standing even for the whole time of the reading. We are also told that there was interpretation of the reading. So Ezra didn't just read it, but he and the other priests helped the people understand what was being read. It's not much different from what happens in a church service or Bible study today. We read and hear the words of the Lord, and then and discuss what it means. Now, where this story in Ezra differs from our usual worship or Bible study is the emotional response from the people. We hear that as Ezra read, they wept. We don't get too much weeping in our worship service or Bible studies. We don't know if the weeping was in joy for finally being able to hear the word of the Lord after so much time in exile, or whether it was in despair as they realized how far from the law of the Lord they had grown, both while in exile and in how their ancestors had behaved in bringing the exile about in the first place. Or perhaps it was sadness in hearing about how wonderful things had once been and how far they now were from those glory days. Regardless of the reasons for their tears, Nehemiah and Ezra tell the people to stop their weeping and mourning, for this was a holy day to the Lord. It was a day of new starts, of celebrating their return to the land and to the rebuilding of the temple. In that way, it's not much different from our worship. For we worship on Sundays, the first day of the week, a natural time of new beginnings. And for us, Sundays is also the weekly celebration of the day Jesus rose from the dead, the day that represents new life for us all. So whatever joys or sorrows this past week have brought you, whatever mistakes or disappointments you've had this week, today is the first day of a new week. The slate has been wiped clean because God has given us new life in Jesus' resurrection. Like the people listening to Ezra upon rebuilding their city, and like the two tennis players who won a set apiece in their match, we get to start anew. I invite you to stand as you are able for our hymn of the day, number 5.